Hello, welcome to our week 46 video in our Through My Bible in 1 Year series here at St. John's as we start to wrap things up, and especially in looking at the history of God's people. This coming week you're going to finish up the book of Ezekiel and move into the book of Daniel, along with finishing up the Gospel of John as well. And as you moved through Ezekiel and John this past week, I'd ask you to consider especially that most famous chapter of Ezekiel, Ezekiel chapter 37, in the light of chapter 36, in which God promised to wash his people clean, to help them bear fruit. What does chapter 36 give us that helps us to understand chapter 37? Well, chapter 37 is the Valley of the Dry Bones. Dry bones hear the word of the Lord, and so on. And without the context of chapter 36 and the rest of the Bible for that matter, we could look at the Valley of the Dry Bones and think that that is what we might call an immediate working of the Spirit just deciding to wake people up and making them alive, when we see in chapter 36 that there is a need that the people have. The people need to be forgiven. They need to be washed clean of their sin. And so then the work of the Spirit in chapter 37 is the proclamation of that which makes people clean, which announces the forgiveness of sin. That is the gospel message. It is the gospel proclamation then that wakes people up from being spiritually dead, which is their natural condition. Thus also the words of chapter 37 become a metaphor for any Christian that is brought to faith, because any person in this world comes into the world spiritually dead, and the Spirit comes then with the message of the gospel, either through the sacraments or through the word, and makes that person alive spiritually. I'd ask you then also to keep on with the I am statements of the Gospel of John, and also to consider their context. Now, last time we'd gone through the first four I am statements of Jesus, and for the most part, the I am statements of Jesus were given to people at first who did not believe in him. I am the bread of life, and so on. Now we move on, and in John chapter 11, when Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life, he's speaking to Martha on the occasion of her brother Lazarus' death, and he is giving her comfort. So this is the first I am statement of Jesus that is really meant for comfort for God's people. I am the resurrection and the life, Jesus says. And then, of course, Jesus goes on to prove that he is more than just a speaker of words. He proves the truth of those words by raising Lazarus from the dead. The next statement of Jesus in the I am statements of Jesus is, I am the way, the truth, and the life in John chapter 14. And John records this as happening on Maundy Thursday, when Jesus is gathered with his disciples in the upper room, and he is talking to them about his impending suffering and death, and he wants to remind them of how important the work that he is going to do is going to be for them. He uses this opportunity to remind them of the close connection between himself and his Father. That's the context of I am the way, the truth, and the life. That he and the Father are one, and Jesus goes so far as to say, no one comes to the Father except through me. The next and final I am statement of Jesus in John 15 happens the same night. On Maundy Thursday, Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. And in saying that, Jesus is talking about the connection between himself and his disciples. And not just those disciples that he'd gathered to himself at that one time, but all of the followers of Jesus throughout all time, you and me included. The relationship between us and Jesus is not one of equality like the relationship between Jesus and the Father. It is of subservience. I am the vine, Jesus says. You are the branches. But being connected to Jesus means something wonderful. We who otherwise would be dead without Jesus are able to be alive and produce much spiritual fruit. As you move on to finish up Ezekiel and then go through the prophetic book of Daniel, I'd ask you to look especially at the revelations that God gave Daniel in the last half of the book that bears his name, and see if you can identify the nations and the historical figures that God prophesies through the messages, the visions that he gives Daniel. Also, as you move on through the account of John and the passion of Jesus, I'd ask you to pick out those details of the passion of Jesus that are solely to be found in the Gospel of John itself. God's blessings on your weekly reading, and we will look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.